Great. Thank you very much for coming and listening up to what I'll try to inspire a little bit of conversations coming up next. And I thought a good way to do that, I don't know if the best one or just a good one, is to tell you a little bit my personal story of what I've been experiencing during the last years, during most of my life, and what led me to what I am, what I think, what I do right now. And maybe out of these we can start seeing different ideas that appear during the story, and that will lead to open questions that we can chat about later. I much prefer to discuss over ideas on a conversation, a two-way conversation than a one-way conversation. So I'll try to keep this short and just put the big ideas out there, and I'm very happy to continue that conversation later on. So I was raised in the Pyrenees, very far away from here. This is in the south of Europe, very close to the Mediterranean Sea. And my parents' place, where I grew up, it was in the middle of a vast forest on top of a mountain. You could see 30 miles away on the horizon, and you can only see forest. And that's the setting I grew up in. And I think from that very early on, I understood that there was not only a connection with nature, but that we were, or I am, and we all are part of a very large system, and that really challenges the identity of oneself when you don't see a very clear line or border on your own skin or what defines who you are on your own, but you just identify your identity as part of a very larger being, not ending up where the other begins. There's no very clear borders. And I think that's very important when we talk about climate change, as understanding it as a systemic issue that affects so many things that are not only interconnected, but they're just part of the same thing. So being raised in that and going back home every so often, I clearly see the impacts of climate change. And I don't see it so much on nature itself. It just continues regenerating. I see it as a feeling of threat to my own self, my own identity, our own selves and our own identities. When I hear that in nearby valleys or in my same region there's wildfires that consume forests that they've been standing there for hundreds of thousands of years, that consume lives and livelihoods, and I just simply can't imagine that happening to the place where I grew up, and that living with that threat is a very huge impact of climate change for myself. So I was determined from very young to find a solution to that, and naive as I was when I was very young, I thought we should find a technological fix to it. And I was looking at ways of producing energy in another manner, so I started studying about bioenergy, inspired by the same nature I was growing in. And I started studying biotechnology, and that's how I became a biologist, really, because I was interested in understanding the way how plants, nature overall, how the biological systems get the energy from the universe through photosynthesis, and how we should do the same. Not taking it from underground, but just taking it from what nature provides. So I was studying different ways of finding a solution to the energy problem that we had, the energy challenge. But soon enough I realized that it was not only a problem of finding an alternative energy, it was a problem of decision, of choice, of policy making. Because the energy choices, we have plenty of energy choices to take up from, and we've been living without fossil fuels for the entire history, up until 150 years ago, really. So it's not only a matter of finding alternative sources, it's a matter of using them. And when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about an issue of power as well, who decides what we do collectively. And later on I realized that it was very important to engage with policy making, so I got involved in this group when I was living in Sweden, which was called Push Sweden, that brought me to the UN Conference of Parties on Climate Change, COP21. So I attended there as a representative of my university, University of Uppsala, and this group, Push Sweden. And that was a huge learning experience, seeing how the Paris Agreement was negotiated and sealed. And I think I had a very important learning that I took out of that experience at COP21. And it was that of the human relations that arise out of the climate change issue. And I could see that many different kinds of people and attitudes at COP21. But most importantly, I could see that disparate, like people feeling hopeless and very, very angry. Those people that were coming from indigenous groups, from small islands in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, that they're threatened by climate change. And I could also see those people that were just there to do diplomacy, and they were not really feeling that existential threat. And unfortunately, the latter ones, that have the power to decide at the UN. So I'm afraid to say that the Paris Agreement is not really a step forward for the fight against climate change. So seeing climate change as a human issue, it's also important to understand that while we've usually been told that climate change affects us all and we are all responsible for it and we should all do something about it, it's not entirely true. We're all affected about it, but it's important to recognize that we are all differently affected about it. And we are all responsible about it, but there's people who are certainly much more responsible than other people. And this cuts through, importantly, lines of wealth and socioeconomical status. This crosses lines and is organized through lines of race inequality, of gender inequality, and it also has a very strong connection with empire and colonialism. So it's not enough to understand climate change as an isolated issue. Climate change is itself a symptom of a larger systemic problem. And this connects to issues of gender justice, of social justice, even tax evasion, and decolonial struggles as well. So if we want to change climate change, if we want to stop climate change, it's not enough to only tackle the fossil fuel industry and decrease emissions. We have to tackle all these interconnected things at the same time. So as the saying goes, it's already popular, we don't want climate change, we want system change. And that's what we should strive for. So from quite a long time ago, I stopped eating meat, I stopped flying, I don't even have a fridge or a freezer at home, just because I feel personally that I have this necessity to fight climate change. But you realize very early on when you start doing these things, you continue looking around you and nothing has changed. And there's a very early limit to how much you can achieve just doing changes in your day-to-day lives. And then you realize that the true changes come when you come together and you take collective action. And I think now moving more into the solutions part and just to close up, I think tackling climate change as a systemic issue, it necessitates to act in collectivity with other people to actually be able to change the system. And we have to acknowledge when acting against climate change our positions of privilege, that we live in a democracy and that we have freedom to express ourselves And we have actually much more power than any other people in this world. Most of the population of this world don't live in a democracy. They don't have the freedom to express their political opinions. We do. And we have a responsibility to take that. Not only because we can in our countries, also because our countries and our economical history has been most responsible for climate change. So, just to bring it back to the apathy, I think once we understand the root of the climate change issue as a systemic issue, and we understand how the system operates, and once we understand what is our position and what are our privileges, what are our powers in connection to this system, when we understand both and the way how they connect, there's really no place for apathy, because if there's an issue that threatens humanity, the existence of humanity and many people, and we know what to do about it, we cannot simply just sit down and look at it happening. Thank you.
Marcel, so we're going to just take time to do another listen.